Hey guys, Freddy here, welcome back to a retro RPG. But this is part of a new series I'm doing, because over all these years that I've been doing this channel, some 5 years now, I've only really touched on 2 of the settings from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I've touched on Forgotten Realms and I've touched on Dark Sun, way back when the channel started. And one of the strengths of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons over all of the other editions of Dungeons & Dragons that I've talked about was the number of different settings. I think I've added up, there's about 15 that I know of, and I want to have a look at those. Let's see the breadth of different things that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons presented us with. Let's have a look at the strength of that system, to me personally. And let's start off with the very first one. Let's have a look at Greyhawk.
So, this is the World of Greyhawk, fantasy game setting by Gary Gygax, which came out from TSR in 1983. And it's essentially the first fantasy setting published extra to a game. Now, obviously, there were earlier ones. So, if we look here, we actually saw Greyhawk be released in Supplement 1 in 1976, which I've made a video on previously. Now, when I flipped through that, what I was surprised at was how little of the world in there. It's setting up monsters, it's setting up classes and things like that. But there were no real descriptions which fleshed out the world massively. And that somewhat surprised me. And that's what I found as well in this box set, that the world it creates is very generic. It's just very generic fantasy. But what becomes clear is that's the feature, not a bug. Because what Gary Gygax was doing was creating a background for your adventures. He wasn't creating it to be a feature itself. It was just for you to exercise your imagination and have something in the background. And if we look at the way Gary Gygax thought in the early days, because he didn't believe that anyone would buy adventures or campaign settings, because he thought everybody was going to be so keen to use their imagination and make stuff up, that he didn't think there'd be any money to be made in it. But what he didn't really get was the time saver that things like this are. And he learned that over the years because of the successes of various stuff. But the World of Greyhawk is playing into that mindset in being very, very generic, but giving you lots and lots of background for you to use to set your own adventures in. There's also something very interesting the way this is set up, in that it is written in the style of the World of Greyhawk has continued, and in the future, their sort of industrialized age, somebody has written a historical game based on the age of magic in Greyhawk. And that's what we're getting here. And the game that they're running isn't Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, because that's what this was published for. It's a game in their own world. It's just that because we are seeing it from our world, we are seeing the rules converted across, which is a really, really interesting way of doing it, especially for something as early as this. I can see somebody doing something like that. We saw it in things like Castle Falkenstein, where it was a peek into a parallel world, and the game that we're playing in that is the game from their world. But this, for being very much the first box set containing a campaign world, is approaching it from such a weird angle. And I totally appreciate that. Having a look at the back cover. Enter a world of wonder and intrigue, a world where bandit kings raid from a remote stronghold, a world where noble elves fight savage invaders, and where bold knights wage war on the turrets of Tuz, a world scarred by a vast sea of dust, across which drift lost memories from the awful forgotten past. Enter the World of Greyhawk, a fantasy game setting for a panoramic view of this fantastic place. More than a collection of maps and names, this is an active world filled with decaying empires and dark forests. Game elements include the gods of Greyhawk, the clash of political factions, and the encounters in this wild land. Which sounds very generic for any fantasy setting. Inside, we've got a guide to the World of Greyhawk fantasy setting, a catalogue of the lands of Flaness, being the eastern portion of the continent of Earth. A nice color plate of the different heraldry, And then A Guide to the World of Greyhawk, Volume 3, a catalogue of the lands of Flaness, being the eastern portion of the continent of Auric Earth. Credits Gary Gygax, copyright 1983. And the table of contents we go through Eastern Auric and relation and the whole Earth and the heavenly bodies. And it talks through that. Now, one of the things which strikes me in this is how little artwork there is, but we're getting a lot of text in here. So we've got days and months of the year. We're fleshing out the world, climates and seasons. Trees common to the Flaness. Bronzewood trees. Brief history of Eastern Auric. The common years when things happened. Maps of the migration. An examination of populations, small villages and towns, characteristics, the races inhabiting the Flaness, racial and national dress, ancient and current languages, potentious run and glyphs, an overview of political divisions. So, different governments, including Blackmore, the Caliphate of Ekbia, the Grand Duchy of Jeff, the Pre-City of Greyhawk, High Folk Independent Town, One Society, Kingdom of Keerland, Ket. So many names that I recognise here, but I haven't played a lot in Greyhawk. I played in a campaign set there many years ago, but we never explored much territory. And I'm playing in one now, but we haven't got far. We're still only 3rd level. Lots and lots of places, talking about all of these areas, explaining them, the Snow Barbarians, the Spindrift Isles, the Hold of Stonefist, the Duchy of Ten, Bull, Valley of the Mage, the Wild Coast, the Yeomanry, Sultanate of Ziph. We've got regional alignments, regional products, geographical marvels, regions and prominent features. Hills and highlands, so we talk about different terrain, marshes and swamps, mountain ranges, different rivers, listing them out, the timberlands and forests, the wastelands, and then we're on to the deities of the world of Greyhawk. So we've got a list of the different gods, and then it details them out. As I said, not much artwork in here. I would have liked the holy symbols of them, letting us know more about them a bit, even if it didn't have images of the gods themselves. Royal and noble precedents and general honorifics. And then we've got the Glossography for the Guide to the World of Greyhawk fantasy setting. Now this is sort of ruled system, so how to read the map coordinates. And this is the In the Worlds part, the Glossography for the Guide to the World of Greyhawk, compiled by Pluffett Smedger the Elder at the Royal University of Realmord, CY 998. We've got the foreword talking through it. Settlement populations, encounter tables. As I said, this is all for the game. These are rules as well, but written by this scholar. Patrol encounters, random encounters for different sets. So the Bone Marsh, Selene and High Folk, Greyhawk and Verbonic, Kit and Perenland. But random encounter tables for the forests, for the mountain ranges, for the hills and highlands, for the bodies of water, for the wastelands, for the marshes. Distribution of high-level NPCs. Description of different rulers of Greyhawk. Weather in the world, including tables to determine weather conditions. Terrain effects. Example of weather generation. Effects of climatic extremes. And then we go into adventures on the world of Greyhawk. So we've got Quest of the Mist Golem, the Werewolves of Mennerwood, the Lost Passage of the Sulois, the Jungle of Lost Ships, the Copper Raider, the Stolen Seal. Very evocative names. Different adventure locales. Determining a character's place of birth. So we've got random random generations to say, birthplaces for demi-human characters. So if you're elf, you roll randomly. If we rolled 42, he's in the Shield Lands. But if we rolled 42 for a dwarf, he'd be born in the Prone Land. Personages and quasi-deities. So different large characters, the deities of the world of Greyhawk, including lesser gods. Just lots and lots of information about them, using the game rules and some background information as well. An index to the cities and features of the Flaness. And a map. If I switch to this, we can see we've got the larger maps. It was one huge page, but if I was to display that, it would come out as absolutely tiny. And then we're at the back cover. So, World of Greyhawk fantasy game setting. There's a lot to like in there. It's done in a very interesting fashion. But as I said, it's very, very generic. We're not going to find anything completely different to other role-playing games, different settings. It's not as exciting as some of the ones I'm going to come on to, which is why I chose this as the starting point. Might as well start at the basic one that everything evolved from.
So that was Greyhawk, and that's a good place to start this series, with a nice generic fantasy setting. There's nothing too fascinating or interesting in there, except the way it's presented. I did not expect that from a fantasy setting. I expected it to just lay things out in game terms, without making a story within the book about somebody in the future of Greyhawk writing historical text on it. It's a really interesting way of doing it, especially as they're writing up this historical text for playing a version of a role-playing game in their own world. Really fascinating stuff there. I really, really like that. Completely different to what I expected. Anyway, that's a nice place for us to start the series, having a look at generic setting, where there's nothing too different in it. Because some of these other settings that we'll be covering in the future weeks are going to be very, very different. But anyway, as usual, I think I've been wittering on for quite long enough. So thank you very much for watching. And as always, most of all, you look after yourselves. And I'll catch you later. Bye now.